We looked at this a couple of weeks ago. Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. And at the time, I suggested that one of the most significant aspects of this painting is just the centrality and human quality of it. How all the action is happening in her eyes, within her mind. She is nobody of any great importance, but for me at least, lots of people have opinions about this. For me at least, the interest in this is really a sense of human dignity and the enormity of the human mind. She's thinking something. She's thinking something fairly complex and sophisticated. Not necessarily physics or anything like that, but you get a sense, looking in her eyes, that there is depth there, which is a hallmark of the Renaissance, the human potentiality for limitlessness. But one thing that I did not mention that I'd just like to key in on is another aspect of it that Leonardo was playing with. An Italian word, technique, called sfumato. Like all Italian, it's really fun to say. Do yourself a treat someday and say it out loud, even if you're alone. Probably more when you're alone. Sfumato. Sfumato is smokiness. You can see fumo in the middle of it. And what is different with this painting is that there's not really a clear line demarking lines. He's not just sketching something in pencil and painting it in. He is using the colors to blur those hard outlines a little bit. This gets a little bit tricky of a concept. And it's very difficult to see when you're, this is not particularly clear. But every difference in shade, every outline, so to speak, is really just very subtle and gradational shifts in color. So that it almost looks a little blurred. Even hard lines, if you look really close on a good print, is an evolution from one shape into the other. It's less distinct. Now, the technique from an artistic standpoint is debatable as to whether it's good for capturing forms or anything like that. But what I want to focus on, just to plant an idea that will develop, is the indistinct nature of the individual itself. Everything kind of blurs together on a very minute level. There is a flexibility there. There is a intangibility there. Form is indistinct. this is yet another painter, Caravaggio. Da Vinci is what they call high Renaissance in Italy. Caravaggio is more late Renaissance. This is painted somewhere around the year 1600, and this is his portrait of the conversion on the way to Damascus. This is the biblical story of St. Paul, who at the time was a Jew named Saul, S-A-U-L, who was riding along on his way to the city of Damascus one day when he was struck by a vision of God and instantly declared himself a Christian. He was around a generation or two after the time of Christ himself. And from that point forward, he goes on to become the great proselytizer of the Christian religion. That is the biblical story. Here, Caravaggio tackles this in very Caravaggio terms. He liked dark, you can tell. It's very shadowy. There is great contrast between the light and the dark. But what I find significant is the figures themselves. Now, it's kind of an unusual composition. He's lying on the ground, arms extended up. There's this horse that he just fell off of, and then this guy who seems to be an attendant of some form, handing him what looks like a little cup or something. No, wait, that's not a cup. Okay, yeah, he's holding the bridle of the horse. It's just very hard to see on this. Saul is enraptured with a vision of God, with a sudden seizure of divinity. And you see his arms sort of like reaching out. Very well defined arms, very lifelike composition of the faces. This guy up here, again, very poor resolution, but if you Google it, you can see he's got a very human, normal, recognizably realistic forehead. And even the horse, the musculature is very realistic. And you see this figure reaching up in a kind of divine ecstasy, in contrast with the two figures above him looking at him, the attendant and the horse, who seem completely unimpressed. The horse himself seems especially unimpressed. Yeah, you saw God? That's nice. Where are my oats? Completely unimpressed. Now, if you want to show a picture of somebody in the immediate aftermath of a vision of God, why would you do it like this? Why would you contrast it with this? Seems like a muddled message to me. Are you excited to have a vision of God? Or is it more about the reception of this sort of ecstasy? He's reaching up. His arms are extended in worship. Makes me think, personally, the end of Inferno, looking up at the stars. But written out like this, painted like this, the image is also very actual. Because in my mind, I've got this image of Dante worshiping the stars, but that's only in my mind. When I actually see something like this, I have to say, well, in reality, that looks a little different. In reality, the perspective looks a little more humble, a little less momentous. This is a guy who fell off his horse. His reception doesn't seem anything more serious than that. Oh, you fell off your horse. Oh, yeah, that looked like that hurt. You don't seem to be bleeding. Your eyes are open. Yeah, you're probably going to have a headache. You're going to be really sore for a while, but you'll get over it. Walk it off. Completely unimpressed. But the ecstasy is still there. The worship is still there. The arms are reaching up to embrace God. The arms are also, it must be said, empty. There is no God there. Also Caravaggio. This is, what is the title of this one? I always get it wrong. The Incredulity of St. Thomas. You gotta expect the title to be gotten wrong when you title something with the word incredulity. Sorry. This refers to the biblical story. I think it's the Gospel according to John. Could be wrong about that. Of Christ was crucified. He comes back from the dead. And he wanders around and bumps into some old friends of his. Thomas doesn't believe he's him. Hey, I know you look like my friend, but I'm pretty sure I saw him executed just the other day. I was there. It was gruesome. I watched the whole thing. There are lots of witnesses. It was in all the papers. How could you be Jesus? The story goes that Jesus then opens up, shows him wounds. Wounded hand, where the nails go through to the cross, and also a gaping hole in his side where he was stabbed while up there being tortured and dying. And you see this moment where Thomas literally sticks his finger into Christ's gut to fish around in there because he won't take Jesus' word for it. He won't just believe that, oh yeah, okay, you're my friend Jesus. I'm going to inspect. I'm not going to take your word for it. I need to know for myself. I need to understand the facts before I can believe. And so you see him in this, I think it's gruesome, but I think it's actually rather funny moment of, you look at his face there and his eyes poking around in this poor guy's gullet saying, oh God, this is real. This is actually Jesus. And I am stabbing him in what looks like the kidney. Yes, James.
So don't they believe in God through blind faith as well?
Blind faith is a much debated concept that develops over time. The point of this story is about having faith. There are a lot of points to the story, and it's very hard to nail down that. The reason that it is being portrayed here, I would say, is Caravaggio's capturing of human curiosity. The urge to know specifically. And not just about, Jesus, the Christ figure, the Godhead, the big kahuna, but actually to get down into the details and study, to learn empirically everything you know or everything you can know about something before making any judgment at all about it. Yes?
Kind of looks like Jesus is guiding.
Yeah, he said, yeah, sure, yeah, get in there. Come on, poke around. You're not hurting me. What's that? I don't think he washed his hands immediately before this, and, I seriously doubt they had the little sanitary packs or wipes available. Yeah, well, he was already dead. He's not going to get gangrene after this. But that spirit of curiosity, the recognition and the emphasis on the human quality of Jesus himself. Think back to some of the medieval renderings where he was not really human at all. Here, after the Renaissance had processed all of that, it is very much a human Christ. There is no halo up there. His flesh looks completely real. A little too real. The idealism of him has been drained out, and you see his human character coming under some scrutiny. The focus of it is really very much on that finger. Now, when I see a finger sticking out like that, I think of Michelangelo and the touch of God into Adam that we saw on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which is about inspiration. Here, this is not really inspiration. This is investigation. This is the scientific mind asserting itself, the human drive to know surging ahead of fear and anxiety. Because, let's face it, Jesus had been executed just a couple of days before. And he doesn't seem all that bothered that there is a corpse wandering around. He's trying to figure out what happened. He's trying to get an intellectual understanding of what's going on. There's no fear in his head, even as he's sort of realizing that he's poking the big guy. But it's curiosity. It's wonder, but a specific kind of empirical wonder. He wants to know, is this really God? Is this just a man? The line between those two seems especially porous, especially blurred, especially, dare I say, sfumato. Again, it's a fun word. No, that's not what I want. Back in the earlier chunk of the Renaissance, still in Italy, we have Petrarch. A couple of generations after Dante. More or less the same same social class, same development as a poet, but Petrarch sticks with shorter lyric poems for the most part. He writes an awful lot, but he is most famous for a series of shorter poems, whereas Dante, of course, is known primarily, although he wrote a lot of shorter ones, some shorter ones, he's named primarily for the big one. Petrarch makes his name for developing the sonnet, as we came to know it, the Italian sonnet, also known as the Petrarchan Sonnet. And in this, you see, kind of like in Dante, which had that very regular rhyme scheme, you see a very structured, formatted poem. You have essentially two halves of every sonnet. There's 14 lines. It's divided essentially into two parts. The first part is the octave, which means eight lines. Second part is the sestet, that is 6 lines. By my count, 8 and 6 makes 14. The first part sets up a problem. The second part resolves it. And you can see a very regular rhyme scheme, which is, what is it? Let me try and get this out. A, B, B, A, sasso, asconde, risponde, basso, lasso, onde, fronde, passo, morta, immortale, e ame. And then it goes on. Very regular, very rigid. But he can do it because he's a genius. You know, geniuses are like that. This is the translation of what I just showed you. I don't expect anybody to really follow the Italian, although I highly recommend it. Mainly just for pronouncing it out loud. This is actually in your book. It is page 158 of the 4th edition. Go, grieving rhymes of mine, to that hard stone, whereunder lies my darling, lies my dear, and cry to her to speak from heaven's sphere. Her mortal part with grass is overgrown. The attitude of humanity expressed in Petrarchan Sonnets is fairly consistent. And it is very much a work of devotion. Very much the character of the poet is a man, and he is worshiping an ideal woman. Just like Dante had Beatrice, Petrarch has Laura. And he raises Laura into a kind of divine figure, again like Beatrice. And he is deeply, deeply in love with her. And deeply emotional about it. Tell her I'm sick of living, that I'm blown by winds of grief from the course I ought to steer. That praise of her is all my purpose here and all my business. That of her alone do I go telling, that how she lived and died and lives again in immortality, all men may know and love my Laura's grace. Oh, may she deign to stand at my bedside when I can't come to die, and may she call to me and draw me to her in that blessed place. Absolutely subjugated by love. Almost a victim of his enthusiasm. Go, grieving rhymes of mine. He's addressing his poem itself. To that hard stone whereunder lies my darling. Laura has died, and he is writing about her. Not unlike Beatrice. And cry to her to speak from heaven's sphere. Her mortal part with grass is overgrown. The division. The mortal part is the body with grass is overgrown. She is in the grave. But her immortal part, her divine essence, her spirit, is up there in heaven. And this is whom he is seeking, appealing to. That division, that separation, is key to understanding what he's doing here. He's trying to bridge that gap. He feels dragged down by his own mortality, his own earthly essence. The body is a weight that is holding him back. He uses his poem to bridge that gap, to get into a conversation with the divine, to connect in some way with this spirit that he feels so acutely the absence of. He writes this poem both as a way of personally contacting her, but also of celebrating her. Of her alone do I go telling that how she lived and died and lives again in immortality. I will make her famous. Through my poetry, she will continue to radiate down upon the earth. Because of my poetry, she can still have an effect. She can reach the earthly realm. Now, she is conceivably up with God at this moment. But she needs his poetry to reach the earth. He is empowering his poetry to do what perhaps the heavenly realm cannot do, which is reach down to earth. He is positing that I can celebrate her with my poems and at the same time empower the divine realm to speak to humanity. Empower the divine. He's essentially taking over the role of God with his poem. Art itself can inspire. Art itself can act as God, can be a substitute for God. So the line between art and divinity, between the human and the divine, is again blurred. Which is which? Is it art? Is it God? I'm not sure. I feel inspired, but I'm not sure from where. Oh, may she deign to stand at my bedside when I come to die, and may she call to me and draw me to her in the blessed place. Now this is how he ends. Always look at beginnings and endings. He ends with a vision of himself being called up into the divine realm, into the arms of heaven. And he casts himself very humbly in this. May she deign to stand at my bedside. When I am an old man, perhaps, or when I'm very sick, her spirit will come down and visit me as I am dying, and she will take me by the hand and escort me up to God. It is at once very humbling because, you know, Dane, it's a translation, but still it means, you know, she's going to lower herself, literally, to come down and help guide him. But a little like Dante again, who is he to call on anybody from the divine realm to come and give him an escort? There is a remarkable confidence or arrogance in this that the human has any right to claim that the divine realm should do anything at all. There's another melding of these two worlds. It's a little uncertain where the line between devotion and arrogance falls. This was how the sonnet got introduced into mainstream Renaissance culture. There were a lot of other characters on the scene. Petrarch was the main guy, and his example led the way for most others. What happened as it radiated out into other languages, well, the same difficult rhyme scheme that we saw can be tricky when you have to shoehorn an entire different idiom into it. English is very different than Italian. Things have to get changed around a little bit. When we come to the English, we get to the master sonneteer, Shakespeare. Shakespeare changes it around. 3 quatrains and a rhyming couplet. So instead of being a division of 8 and 6, it's now 3 groups of 4 lines and a little pair down at the end. Here, you can see another rigorous, where'd that go? Rhyme scheme. And you can go on about the rhyme scheme and the line length and the rhythm and all that stuff, and I don't want to get too Englishy on you. But what I want you to take away from this is the pose. The identity of the speaker and the way the speaker characterizes himself. It's much more self-aware. It's much more self-conscious. It's much less concerned with God and much more concerned with earth. I'm going to put this up now. There we go. Why is my life, or is my verse, so barren of new pride? James-O! How you doing? Oh, we're going to see what we can do about that. You feeling pretty good? We're going to have to do something. Why is my verse so barren of new pride? What is he talking about here?
So I think what he's saying is like he's lacking you. He's like very young. His poem is the same. He wants to change his variation.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's very concerned that.
It's lacking new ornaments.
What's that?
Lacking new ornaments.
What are new ornaments?
Like styles.
Yeah.
Styles.
Styles. He's worried about being a little out of fashion, a little dotty, a little out of step with, you know, all the hip kids aren't doing sonnets anymore. They're on to other forms. Come on, get with it. He's concerned about his verse, his art. Not writing about God, nothing that portentous. He's really kind of self-involved here, you know. Why can't I be more fashionable? Why can't I keep up with the times? So there's a different scope of interest here. Why is my verse so barren of new pride? That's an interesting word too, barren. Now, again, we are finally in this class dealing with a non-translated work, so we can really zero in on individual words without having to worry about, well, the translator is going on about this, and you know, that's not a good translation. We've seen those problems in the past. Just 5 minutes ago when I was talking about Petrarch. Well, I didn't really harp on him too much, but I could have. But barren. What is barren in this world? Why barren? What does barren mean?
Isn't it like land that can never grow?
Land you can never grow anything on. Yeah? Land, no grow. I don't need to use syntax. Land, no grow. What? No value. Yes? Sarah? What's that? Okay. Now we're getting much more general, which actually helps. It lacks life. So far from variation or quick change, why with the time do I not glance aside to newfound methods and to compounds strange? Quick is an interesting word here. And obviously, you know, you can go on about, well, it means fast. But in reality, at the time, this is a very fruitful time in English, quick at the time also meant lively, alive. So in the first two lines, beginnings and endings, the first two lines, you have a reference to something that is no life, barren, and a word that means life itself. What could, just with those two words on there, what could he be writing about?
His style.
What's that?
His style.
His style, yeah. What else? That's on a very literal reading of this. It's exactly literal. He is writing about his writing style and bemoaning whether or not he should, you know, go with the trends.
What you do?
Yeah, change it up. Put it in a different rhyme scheme. Get radical, get wiggy with it. That is a literal reading. What is a non-literal reading of the words barren or quick? Birth. In these two lines, he is complaining that why is my verse so barren of new pride, so far from variation or quick change? He is concerned on a literal level about his poetry going out of fashion and being forgotten. His writing is a kind of birth. Yeah.
Right. Now I just want to say because based on the other sonnets, it seems like his poetry is like a representation of himself. So I'm just thinking like, is he talking like his life, his stagnant, and his style too?
Judgments about whether or not he is writing about himself, and whether or not he is talking about his life, and whether or not any of them have any relation to his biography in any way, shape, or form. That is a highly contentious field of study with absolutely no evidence behind it. Shakespeare, one of the reasons I like him, is a total blank to us. We know roughly when he was born. We have a record of his baptism, and based on customs at the time, we can say that, okay, he was born on this date, because we have a baptismal record of April 26th or something like that, or something. Is it?
April 26th.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. We have that record. We have a death certificate of sorts, a death record in the year, I think, 1619, I want to say. But again, I'm terrible with dates. And we have a few financial transactions in between. We know practically nothing about his life. We know he was married at some point. He had kids. Some of them died. The sort of records that just about everybody has at that time. Everything else is a blank. So, trying to read too much into anything, is tricky. Now, what sets the sonnets apart from the plays, and we'll get to the plays, obviously. What sets the sonnets apart is that when they were produced, he published a book of them, and they were in a certain sequence that some critics say can be read as a kind of story, as a kind of narrative. It's very tricky. You start getting very abstract at that point, and I don't particularly think it's worthwhile going there, especially since we're only dealing with, like, what, a half dozen of these things out of, there are, like 200 or so poems. Again, the numbers jump around on me. I don't really remember. But we're not going to go there. He is very clearly, however, as we have seen, I think, writing about his interest in birth, in fame, in significance. What's that, James?
Love.
Love, yeah. Love is a constant in the sonnets especially, but it's different than Petrarch was dealing with, and we'll get to that. Why is my verse so barren of new change, so far from variation or new pride, so far from variation or quick change? Why with the time do I not glance aside to newfound methods and to compounds strange? Why write I still all one, ever the same, and keep invention in a noted weed? Weed here doesn't necessarily mean pulling up a weed from your garden. Here, this generally means clothing. And every word doth almost tell my name. Seems almost proud of that fact. Oh, I know I'm getting old and stodgy and I can't keep up with the times. It's just such a shame that everything I write is so iconic that I am recognized for it. Everybody knows what a Shakespeare sonnet is. Everybody can look at just a line of mine and say, that's Old Will. So humble. Showing their birth. And where did they proceed? Oh no, sweet love, I always write of you. This sounds an awful lot like Petrarch. I always write of you. You are my subject. You are my inspiration. My writing is in worship of you. And you and love are still my argument. Again, not having a fight, but topic. So all my best is dressing old words new. Dressing. Tying it together a little. Sort of a recurring theme here. This is, of course, all about a kind of literary fashion. So all my best is dressing old words new, spending again what is already spent. For as the sun is daily new and old, so is my love still telling what is told. So is my love still telling what is told. How so?
At first, when I read this, I thought it was talking addressing you. I thought it was like mistress or lover or whatever. But then after I read it a few times, I felt like he was addressing himself, like his love for himself.
He's this isn't really about his beloved in this case. He addresses this person specifically in a very inspecific way.
But he knows he has a distinct style, and like that's what he's known for. So he's kind of like proud of his unique style, even though times are changing. The other poets are using different literary style. Has this distinct style that everybody knows him for. So proud of that.
He's writing more about his writing than he is about love.
It's kind of vain. It's almost like vanity.
Yeah, it is almost like vanity. I would argue it is vanity. He is much more interested in art than in love. At least here. He can say, I always write of you, and you and love are still my argument. But in that, you can't get through a single sentence without two references to himself. He is very self-consciously debating the proper way of worshiping this individual through words. Oops. He is more aware of the formal outline of what he's writing about than what is actually there. Now, because he is writing, I would argue, about birth, I see this as a kind of interior concern. He is writing about the outward form of writing, but in it he's struggling for an answer as to how do I create something that will live on. And within that, he's dropping these little hints that if you pay attention, and if you puzzle over why that word as opposed to a different one, if that jogs your curiosity, you can start to poke in and say, well, there is a little bit of a pattern here. Maybe there's something going on underneath the surface. Maybe there is more to it than meets the eye. It's not just about, gee, I really want to write in the new hip way. There's more going on there. It's not just a formal concern. What's that? This is his legacy. Yeah. And we have seen concern with immortality as a product of writing. We have seen that many times at this point. It's not a new theme. Let not the marriage of true minds. Sarah, how you doing back there? Good.
I was gonna do my presentation on the next time we go over Hamlet.
What?
I was gonna do a presentation on the next time we do Hamlet, so in 2 weeks.
Okay, that's fine. But right now, I'm just going to ask you about this poem.
Oh, okay.
Do me a favor. What does this mean to you? What does the poem mean to you? Can you make any sense of it? Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks with bending sickles compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. What is this about?
It's about love.
Okay. Yeah.
Forever
I
love.
think he claimed that true love will never disappear, and it will always remain.
Yeah. This gets quoted at, some people have this read aloud at a wedding ceremony sometimes. Because it sounds like that. Yeah, almost.
So is he trying to say that love never goes away? You love someone it never really goes away?
Yeah. Love is not time's fool, meaning it is kind of eternal, permanent. Yeah. Kevin?
So the second stanza says love is not love. So are we taking this to literate? I still think love is poetry.
Okay.
Because-
What do you mean love is poetry?
Because it says, okay, so let's go all the way to the end. It says, if this be error, that's pretty much saying that if even when he's about to die, his love, his poetry keeps living on. And if this be an error, so if this doesn't keep living on, then I would never write poetry. His work would disappear, and nor no man would ever be loved. So his name in history would become would be erased.
Yeah.
All right, am I still going too much?
No. The what you're doing is fine. You're trying to come up with an interpretation. You're looking at the individual words in there and trying to come up with a notion of what the hell he's trying to do. And I would argue that it's very confusing what the hell he's trying to do. Yes, April.
through time, even when it doesn't make sense, just like when time is changing and other things are evolving, it stays the same. Which
Uh-huh.
is weird because like everything else is moving and yet this one thing stays the same. But
Sure. Love is cast as an ideal at this point. Something timeless, something eternal, something almost divine.
yeah, but I'm saying like I think it's interesting that everything else in this book is about like changing. Like how he's talking about like all these random things, but this one thing stays constant. Which
Right.
kind of doesn't make sense. But
Yeah.
he's just I think maybe he's just saying like there's this convoluted idea that doesn't make sense, but I'm just here to try to make this work.
Yeah. There's a sense of conflict between the permanence of the ideal. Love is unchanging, love is perfect, love is all this other stuff. But the rest of the world is constantly, a little bit muddier. I would argue that he's going one level deeper on that in trying to even consider it in the form of a poem. Aside from some general concept of love being perfect, does he ever really define love? Because he's taken a couple of swipes at it here, but do you finish this poem with a better understanding of, damn it, that's love? Can you define it yourself based on this piece of evidence? I will point out, on a simple vocabulary level, look at all the negatives. Let me not, love is not, oh no, never shaken, although it's love is not, it is a negative definition. He never says love is this in a very clear way. He says love is not that.
Maybe he doesn't know what love is. He just knows what it's not. So it's easier
Maybe.
to find that.
Even in love subjective, he's telling you love what it is by telling what it's not.
He's trying to define something by arguing its inverse. It's a rhetorical exercise. It's evidence of somebody who, maybe like in a philosophy class, can speak in circles with rather arcane uses of rhetoric.
It's like Confucius. You have to know it. You know
Yeah.
it, you need to know it, you don't.
Exactly. You either know it or you don't. You cannot express something as complicated, as rich, as eternal and ideal as love. And yet he's trying. Why would he do that? If he knows it's impossible, why would you do that? April.
I think also he's saying like this is the whole piece of his life. I don't know, maybe he thinks that that's just God as
Maybe. My job to do the impossible.
yeah.
So here I am, I'm going to waste your time trying to do what I know I cannot do.
Yeah.
Why are you reading this if you know I'm going to fail?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes no sense on that level. He is engaging in something that is impossible. Understanding something eternal. Setting up love as an ideal that is well outside the scope of human understanding.
But that's why Shakespeare is a literary master.
Oh, don't hide behind that. Here he was just a shill trying to make a buck. Literary master, don't give me that. He was just a hungry guy at this point. Even in his own time, he was popular, but nobody really took him that seriously. Yes?
But also, I mean, doesn't make you think about like the other things in life that we try to tackle, other things we do that are really impossible.
Sure, there's a certain inspirational quality to that.
Yeah, I feel like even though it's the idea of what he's
He articulated the confusion,
Yeah.
the inadequacy of his ability to reach a conclusion, the impossibility of ever knowing anything about the ideal, love. Kevin.
So is love taken literally here, like affection?
Is it taken literally? You mean like, is he trying to define?
I'm trying to like understand what love is right now.
Well, so is he, and he's falling short. Maybe you've got some advice for him. I would say, now he is sort of couching this in, well, this whole first line is, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. This is sort of a play off of an actual line in a marriage ceremony for I think it's the English Book of Common Prayer or something like that. And explicitly calling out marriage in that first line. He's setting it up as, okay, this is about love between, a man and a woman getting married or something like that. But he doesn't really dwell on that, and he goes pretty quickly to the ideal, and there he's just sort of dealing with that.
Because here he says as a marriage, but of true mind. It doesn't really represent.
Yeah. What is a true mind? And I would argue also that beginnings and endings, look at the end of the beginning line. Minds. He's concerned about the mind, the ability to understand. He is spending all of this ink spinning his wheels trying to understand something, trying to come up with an answer. But he can't. What?
I think this is a little bit about marriage. Because it says love is not love, which leads me to believe like marriages can be bumpy.
Yeah.
And then I thought about, you said that they read this at weddings. I was like,
Sometimes.
Wow, makes no sense.
Well, they read a lot of stuff at weddings that if you really listen to it, make no sense. Some of this stuff, particularly like, actual Bible readings or something, they're completely inappropriate.
And then we go down, and it says a little bit about the bending sickle, which kind of sounds like the reaper.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Till Death Do Us Part.
Yeah, there's, this is, love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Yeah, that's death. And they're saying here that, love is not subject to death. Love is eternal. Love is divine. But again, these are all very intellectualized concepts. This isn't necessarily love like, heart and soul love you. This is somebody trying and struggling to understand it. Because you get a sense of, it's frustrating. He can't say anything positive about love because he doesn't seem to understand it. He can't get his head around it. He is defeated by the enormity of the topic, shall we say. But he is still trying. He is still trying to get to the bottom of it. He is still poking his head in Christ's gut, saying, I don't know. What can I figure out here? He's making an honest effort, I think, to understand the limits of the ideal and the capacity of human beings to crack into that ideal. The expensive spirit is a waste of shame. This is another one that I find very amusing. Uh, Zaha! How you doing?
So first we do.
So far, so good. I gotta say, when you walked in, I was impressed. Umbrella, because it's raining. Wool sweater. It's warm, but that's gonna absorb water. And earmuffs. That was just an interesting ensemble for dealing with a rotten weather day. I respect it though, and it's a very nice sweater. The expense of spirit. What does that mean?
The value of the spirit, the value of the soul, maybe.
April? What's that? Well, spirit, I think here is, a kind of energy. And expense, value, there's a certain valuation definition there, but it's really playing on like two different versions of this, where it is the cost of your spirit, your energy, the value of it, but also the spending of it. So it is spending your energy. In a waste of shame is lust in action. Go!
But yes.
What is this one about?
This one.
Come on, this is a good one. This one's dirty. Shakespeare has some really great dirty jokes. I'm not saying this is a joke, but he's got a bit of a dirty mind.
Based on my limited knowledge about Shakespeare, I think this poem is talk about the love between William Shakespeare, and the Black Lady become a luster.
Okay.
And
I don't really care about the biography. Again, we don't know. Can we? Just a second.
It's about sex.
It's about sex. Well, all right, we pump the brakes. Okay, let's keep it G-rated for another minute.
in the last line, the poem said, basically, Shakespeare thinks the luster is the heaven, not lead man to the hell. So if you having too much, focus on
Yeah, there's a little something of that there. There's that whole, don't go fiddling around too much because God doesn't like that.
life have to be medium.
What's that?
Life have to be medium.
Life has to be medium. I don't know that he's going there, but
The life lesson.
it's a life lesson. Sure, yeah. What would that lesson be?
It's like his take, his experience on. It's like he's alluding to like sexual innuendo, but he's telling the reader that you should be cautious of having too much of it, because it can be your downfall.
Too much innuendo?
No, too much sexual.
Ah,
Oh yes, it is.
okay, too much innuendo. Yeah, there is that simple moral reading of it that yes, you should not have sex because it's bad for you. Sarah!
I think he's trying to teach a lesson about love, not to I guess not to waste time, because the expense of spirit is also someone's time, their spirit, this person, who they are. So he's just saying not to waste time because of lust, I guess. Just trying to be meaningful relationships.
Yeah, don't waste. It does have that certain after school special tinge to it of, we have a moral here, we're going to drive it home. James!
I just think it's made, Shakespeare, just at a time, him or whatever who he wrote it about, was just hurt, maybe after a relationship or something, and he's just really pissed off, and he's just saying, you know, just don't waste your time. The expense of your spirit is not waste, you know, it shouldn't be wasted for all this shame. And then he goes into all this talk about, it's just, he's really mad. It's just a big, like, what is it, a rant about love.
Yeah.
I think he said that anticipation process calls you to do, I would say, illegal stuff, maybe. But he said savage, extreme, rude, cruel. Only in order to do sex, you can do other stuff.
Yeah.
The way.
It takes up an awful lot of time. It's a little all-consuming. Yeah. And with that, I would suggest to James that it's also not necessarily so much explicitly about love as lust. We don't get a lot of love talk in here. There's a lot of it in the last one. This one, not so much. This is more just about lust. And in this, you can read interpretively, non-literally. Well, it's about physical sensation, earthly concerns, physicality in any sense.
Well, that's why I say, because when a person's heartbroken and just that one word of love is dropped, then all that's left that was lust, and then it's just kind of just ranting about that you know, it's kind of just like, okay, love is dropped, so all was left was lust, and this lust isn't worth your time, so like it's not worth your expense. That's what I got.
Okay.
That's just gonna send you out.
Let me ask this. Just on a simple grammatical level, because again, we're dealing with the original words, no translation. How many sentences are on the board?
2.
2. Very good. This nice, neat little one down at the bottom, and all this is a single sentence. Now, you can be forgiven if that is difficult for you to see, because tracking that sentence all the way through is a little bit difficult. You really just have to search out and find the period. But everything before that is kind of tortured and frustrated. The expense of spirit is a waste of shame, is lust in action, semicolon, until action. Lust is perjured, murdered, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust, enjoyed no sooner but despised, straight, past reason hunted. And no sooner had past reason hated, as a swallowed bait on purpose laid to make the taker mad. Mad in pursuit and in possession so, having, and in quest to have, extreme. A bliss in proof and prove it, a very woe. Before, a joy proposed. Behind, a dream. Huh? What is that? There are a lot of little half thoughts tossed in there, a lot of little digressions. He starts in on something, he really gets going, then he just and goes somewhere else with it. It's frustrated. It's angry almost. Well, I read it kind of angry, so, you know, you can forgive me for that. But he's trying to get at something, and he can't quite say it. He's frustrated.
Right.
And then it all kind of ends behind a dream. Beginnings and endings. He starts, I think, in largely a rant mode. And he gets frustrated, and he twists and turns, and the language itself, and the sentences, and the syntax, all sort of wrestle with one another, twisting this way and that, until you get down to the bottom, and it becomes a dream. Now, a dream is a very euphoric image.
It's meaningless.
What's that?
It's meaningless, the dream. It's
meaningless, yeah.
Just a dream. So
Yeah, it's just an empty concept. But still, it's a kind of a dreamy sensation. When you say the word dream, automatically that sort of softens the edges. That's sort of a blissful experience. So you have all of this torturous frustration, anticipation, lust, and then at the end, very quickly, euphoria. It's over. Ooh. He is reenacting sex. The syntax is frustrating. The syntax is turbulent. The syntax is almost at war with one another. Words wrestling with one another on the page, trying to make sense, trying to break through, trying to come up with some idea of what it's trying to say. Ultimately, it doesn't say that much, and it ends with something that, yes, is kind of meaningless, but has a relief to it. What?
if by saying a dream, he means to say something positive, why does the last sentence says lead men to this hell? Because hell is negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
You should have write it in the opposite.
it's not necessarily a positive dream. It's a dreamlike state. But everything leading up to it tells you that it's a waste. The expense of spirit. Spirit can also mean, in this case, male sexual fluids. I'm not getting more explicit than that, thank you. But it is a waste. It is a tortured frustration that will never achieve what you really want, which is a kind of euphoric ideal, an experience of something perfect, an experience of something, dare I say, divine. And at the end, he just slaps this somewhat moralistic bromide on it. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well, to shun the heaven that leads men to this hell. What does that mean?
And pursue that people are willing to go to extreme measures to do it.
Yeah,
All the anticipation wasn't perfect.
yeah, it's not worth it. But at the same time, all of this the world knows. They know it, and they're still doing it.
It's human nature.
Human nature, exactly. It is human nature to strive after the ideal. It is human nature to want that. It is human nature to frustrate yourself, to occasionally expense an awful lot of spirit in the pursuit of it. It is human nature. We cannot not do it. We have no choice. So why feel bad about it? If there is no use to it, or if there is no choice, if you are going to do it anyway, it is embedded in your DNA. What's the value?
Because you know it's wrong.
Because you know it's wrong?
You can't deny it. So you just keep on doing what you should do. Like your nature and your DNA tells you to do.
What is the value of guilt? What? doesn't have any value. Yeah. The physical is just as well, it is in fact, according to this, it would seem, more powerful than the spiritual. Because the ambition to achieve the ideal doesn't prevent you from doing it. The physical is more important than the ideal. It is more powerful. It is more immediate in this world. Ideally, also, notice that to this hell. Which hell? The hell of the afterlife or the hell of experiencing the guilt and the frustration and the shame?
How long for it?
Hell on earth, maybe. It's a challenge to the conventional pious morality that focuses on the thou shalt not have sex before you're married, or that's not really a commandment, but you know what I'm saying. It's raising the value of human life, physicality, human ambitions, human concerns to a new level. It is humanism, which is the belief that, like we saw in a couple of different iterations so far this semester, human life has value. Human life has some specific worth that is worth considering in art. It's not all supposed to be just about God. It's not all supposed to be somehow corrective of our limitations. It's not all supposed to be simply nagging us to behave properly. It can accept that humanity has many sides. It can accept that humanity has an understanding of the divine and a frustration that it cannot be reached. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. This one is very famous, very popular, very funny. And here, we should all be hearing echoes of Petrarch. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet by heaven I think my love is rare as any she belied with false compare. What's going on here?
First, you always said to look for the first sentence. So the first sentence over here is the Mistress' eye compared to the sun. In many religions, the eye is considered to be the window to the soul. And the sun is considered to be the meaningful of life. So So over here he said that the woman's soul is not the meaningful of life. This is what I see. And then he always say the coral of her red lips is that it's not the same. Something. So it kind of shows in each sentence that the real pure nature of woman is not as beautiful as the nature itself.
Yeah.
When you compare between the two, he also said it with white snow that it's not equal to her breast. The snow, like the sun, shows the beginning of the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, the sun shows the beginning of the day. Roses usually show the beginning of the new reborn. If you give like pink roses, and if you give dark roses, usually it's for funeral, so it shows the end.
Yeah, okay.
So it kind of says that the woman, it's not the beginning or the end of the life, the life itself. Because the only thing it compares between women to other beauty is black wires, which I have no idea why I chose black wires, because I don't see any kind of beauty in black wires.
I don't think he does either.
But still, that's the only comparison he has between women and other natural beauties or other items.
He is setting up a very clear comparison, as you say, between something that is quite perfect and something that is supposed to be near perfect, or conventional traditions have told us that, okay, the eyes are the window of the soul, as you say, so that when I see your eyes, they should remind me of something divine. And yet, as in you mentioned other religions, there are a lot of religious traditions, and we started with one this semester where the sun is himself a god. So yeah, there is that sense of, okay, that is supposed to be ideal, that is supposed to be perfect, that is divine, absolutely. But this woman falls short. She's not meeting that standard. Now, that standard of the divine woman, we saw at the very beginning with Petrarch. Petrarch would celebrate Laura, his divine lady. And everything he wrote about her was a kind of rapture. She was perfect. She was beautiful. She was graceful. She was divinity itself. Now Shakespeare is looking at that and saying, I don't know about your girlfriend, but my lady friend, not so much. Her eyes are not all that enlightening. Her lips are not particularly red and luscious. Her skin on her breasts, a little muddy looking, kind of a off pallor. Not quite how to put my hand on that. Hairs, wires. Ladies, this is not a compliment. If you ever get a Valentine's card like this, think twice about the guy who's sending it. Especially when it gets to some of my favorite lines, because, okay, he's dealing with the visual up top. That's the most abstract, in a way. It's the most intellectualized. The senses of the eyes, generally, are very intellectualized. But when you get down into smell, that's a little bit more personal. That's a little more homey. And when you say that your girlfriend's breath stinks, that's harsh. Again, you don't find this in your average Hallmark card. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I love the sound of my wife's voice But you know, when it's getting past midnight, I'm tired. Stop talking. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads upon the ground. So here he's specifically calling out goddess. He's specifically citing the parallel of the divine woman that you see in Petrarch and the tradition of sonnets, this traditional love poetry, which is supposed to adhere to certain norms and standards, where the woman is always up on a pedestal and is always so perfect. And he's sort of calling that out. And he is getting very funny with it. But then at the end, and yet by heaven I think my love is rare as any she belied with false compare. Now ladies, that's not a bad line. If you get that in a Hallmark card, think twice. Here, he's saying that, yeah, all this idealism is great. Who can really live up to that? You know, I know standing before you, you all think, well, okay, he's an Adonis. But let me assure you, I have my imperfections. It's better to just recognize them for what they are. Because down at the bottom, and yet by heaven, somehow he is more sacred now. I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Now he's writing about something very real. He is writing about love in an abstract sense, but also in a very personal sense. Because my love can be both his girlfriend and also his idea of love. His offering of love, his capacity and human capability to experience love and to express it. He set up the ideal of what a poem is supposed to be in the Renaissance tradition. And like the very first one we looked at, he's sort of playing with that standard. He's poking at it. He's wondering, well, you know, it's all just a form. It's all just, you know, cliches. Yes, I could write about how my love is a goddess. My love is perfect. But it would be a lie. That's all just cliches. Yes?
I think the whole meaning of it is that he's trying to say that the true love shouldn't be perfect in order to exist.
Yeah. True love, he is saying, not only shouldn't be perfect, but can't be. Because perfect is way out there. Perfect is necessarily abstract. It is the marriage of true minds. It's idealistic. It is not something that we experience on a day-to-day basis. It's not something we can. It's outside the human realm. But for what it is, it's still pretty great. We don't have access to the ideal realm. We don't have access to the world of the perfect and the ideal. We do have access to, you know, pretty nice people who are occasionally a little stinky. We have that. And that in itself is a kind of perfection. If we just redefine our terms a little bit, we let go of the abstract ideal and we embrace what is possible. Humanity is possible. Human nature is unavoidable. Why do we deny it? Why do we strive beyond it? Why is there always some ideal that's just out of reach that we're always going to be disappointed by our inability to access? Why? Why bother? Why bother with the guilt? Why bother with the shame? Why not just accept what we can have and try and find what is rare and special in that? Try and find the divine within humanity itself. St. Thomas, poke in that little hole. This is a human being. I'm going to poke in and see if I can find evidence of the divine. It's a remarkably rich perspective. It's a remarkably human perspective. It's very complicated. I don't always understand what he's talking about because I don't think I'm supposed to. I think very frequently Shakespeare will throw stuff up against the page to see, well, let's see if I can just confuse people and get them feeling a little humble. Because we don't understand everything in this world. We are limited by our senses. Our physical limitations are considerable. Whether they are the limitations of distracted by lust, or just that, we're not always all that smart. We can't do certain things. We cannot reach certain standards. We are bogged down by our humanity, but that itself is special. And we should focus on that rather than the ideal. This is all complicated. And in a very real way, it's more fun to read Petrarch, even in clunky English translations, because it's more enthusiastic, it's more emotional, you can get swept up in it, it's more fun. And it's really much more appropriate for quoting at weddings, to be perfectly honest. It's about love. In Petrarch and in the Renaissance tradition of poetry at the time, the art was about love. Shakespeare is coming along, and he's writing about love, but with a little spin on it. He's writing about the knowledge of love. Some critics have argued that you don't get the sense of the emotional impact when he writes about love. All of these poems, we're sitting there puzzling through. Love is not this, love is not that. Well, what is it? He's couching it in a very intellectualized sphere. He is pushing it into a very empirical position where he can study it. Because he seems to understand love in all of its contradictions and all of its frustrations, in all of its enthusiasms and in all of its regrets. His is a knowledge that comes after having love. And he's moved beyond the simple emotionalism of it. Now he's really trying to study it. Now he's really trying to understand what makes it tick. Love is divine, fine. Let's figure out how we can use it. Figure out what it can do for us here on earth, because divine is great for the other realm. What does it really do for me here except make me feel guilt and shame and frustration? He's writing about the complexity of humanity in a way that nobody had really done before, and honestly, nobody's really done since. He's writing about a richness of humanity that is absolutely unparalleled in this world. Think again about the eyes of the Mona Lisa. There's so much behind there. It can't really be expressed, but you can get a sense of the scope of it by just watching her face. Staring into those eyes, that expression, that quizzical little smile, and wondering what is going on there. It is a limitless space because it is the human mind, subject to all the limitations, all the frustrations, all the irritations of human life, but it's very, very rich. And that's what Shakespeare is looking to do. Now, that's the poems. We'll move on to the plays next.